This is the final word story time 183 in our sequence, what will be a brief sequence of double story times. Geoff Lemon and Daniel Norcross with you. Hello, Daniel. First of all, welcome back to the show on 183 matches with the score that Charlie Davis made in Bridgetown back in 1972. We were talking a lot about Charlie Davis on the show last week, Bharat and I. But you were doing story times with Adam. It sounded like you had a good time. So now you and I are going to go around the houses together.
I can't wait. I've got a couple of fruity stories, and I think we'll have a bit of fun today.
I hope so. That is the intention. With these double ups as well, to plough into a few areas that we might not have got to otherwise. A couple of brief bits of correspondence. Jeremy Nash sent this through, and also our resident historian Pat Rogers picked this up when we were talking about Wilf Wooler a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you remember much about Wilf Wooler.
Glamorgan guy. He was one of the first names I became very excited by when I was 9 years old and got my 1958 Wisden, and I was looking at Surrey, and Surrey played Glamorgan in a match in the 1957 season, bowled them out for 60-odd and 30-odd, and Wilf Wooler featured in both, and I had no idea what Wilf Wooler was like, but I imagined him as a kind of furry, Welsh, lovely kind of guy, as 9-year-olds are wont to do when they're imputing ideas onto a name.
Nomenclatural determinism manifests early. Well, he played a lot of sports very well, but he also, as Jeremy pointed out, was the commentator when Garfield Sobers hit Malcolm Nash for those 6 sixes in an over.
Was that Wilf Wooler?
That was Wilf Wooler.
I didn't know that. Oh, wow.
Yeah. So next time you go back and watch that, which I'm sure you do from time to time, you will know that it was Glamorgan's finest. Stephen Westwood also wrote in to our private DM box and said, please ask Adam to tell Daniel that he 100% nailed my Nerd Pledge clue. Just make sure that he never listens to the first 25 seconds of the Sgt. Pepper's album for the rest of his life, or he might realise he didn't.
So hang on, did I nail it or didn't I?
Well, I think he's saying we should tell you that you did, so I might have blown his cover here. But he goes on to say, I was totally awestruck by Daniel's answer, however. I wish my intended answer was more worthy. So this is one where he says, because your answer's so good, it supersedes his answer, thus you were correct.
I mean, that makes me feel both good and also I now want to know what his answer was.
Well, I'm sure you can send us a follow-up message, Stephen, to let us know. But we're going to get rolling today with a bit of Nerd Pledge, the game that we play with nice people on the internet who fund the final word by sending in contributions in a particular denomination that relates to cricket in some way, and we have to figure out what it means. Jai Sharma has sent through $3.79. It's in Australian dollars. He says, I updated my Nerd Pledge after a recent trip through India, staying at a hill station called Ooty for a few nights. Felt like I had been transported back to colonial times. Turns out this place has a pretty famous cricket connection, and I'm sure this player has been on a previous story time. I would love any of the hosts to tell a good cricket story about Ooty or about this player or anything that takes your fancy. That's the kind of open field that I thought you would enjoy, so you will be unleashed to run through the heather of the imagination and into the warm embrace of whoever's coming the other way.
Well, since it's Ooty, I am going to be running through the warm tea plantation of Ooty, or as it is now known, Udagammandalam.
Classic.
Formerly known as Ooty. And of course, there are a couple of great cricketing connections. I'm assuming that he means Harry Nishanth, who played one first-class match, was born in Ooty, scored 23 and 22, is only 27 years old, has played 35 T20s, 798 runs at an average of 26.4 and a very passable strike rate of 124.29. He doesn't bowl. And then I thought, he probably doesn't mean Harry Nishanth. So I did what I always do in situations which involve India, which is I made contact with a friend of us all, but also a very vital resource for the final word story time, Abhishek Mukherjee, the great Abhishek Mukherjee, cricket country.
Deserves the appellation, yes.
He really does, because if anything, it's the speed with which he responds to you and the accuracy of his responses, which is really frightening because, we've all done...
William Tell of cricket statistics.
Yeah. I mean, we kind of like, we sort of remember when we're nudged, don't we, about all the facts that have gone in our brain. But
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I don't retain them all. So I learn them, I do them, I do story time.
You recognise them when you see them again because you know
Correct.
that you've learned them, but that doesn't mean
Yes.
that they're necessarily available at immediate recall anytime you want.
Yeah, not with Abhishek. Abhishek has immediate recall at all times for everything. I think he's never forgotten a single thing that's ever happened in his life. And for that, and for many other reasons, I absolutely adore the man. And so I asked him, is there anybody out there? Is there anybody out there?
Hello.
Ooty, who has played first class cricket and Test match cricket? Who hails from Ooty, because Ooty is a hill station, and that's a phrase that I've heard, but I've never really known what it meant. It's a town on a hill.
Yep.
It's very beautiful. It's got a big tea plantation all the way around it. And that's why he sent me Harry Nishanth. But I had also got back to him because I did know somebody very famous who is reputed to have been born in Ooty. And the person about whom I think our pledger is keen to hear more, because he's an extremely famous man. At one time, he was the leading run scorer in Test history until he was overtaken by Garfield Sobers about a year after he broke the record.
Okay.
He was the first man to score hundreds against all 6 Test-playing nations at the time.
Hold the phone.
All 6. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? That was when Test cricket was really thriving.
Yeah. Well, it
When
gives
there
us
were whole
something to look
6
forward
nations.
to. We look forward to the day when it's reduced once again to 6 and that record will once more stand.
That was apparently a heyday when there were 6. Now we've got more. The game's in terrible trouble.
Now we've got
You
more
work that
and
out.
most of them don't play each other.
There is that. But apparently in those days, much the same was true, because one of the 6 was South Africa, and almost nobody played South Africa.
One was
for
New
very,
Zealand,
very good
who
reasons.
could often go 30 years between Test matches with certain opponents.
You got it. Basically, England got to play against everybody,
Yep.
and Australia got to play against everybody when they felt
If
like
they felt
it.
like it. Yeah,
If
which
they felt
remains
like
the
it.
case.
And this man is from that era.
Okay.
I'm going to put you out of your misery very shortly. 42,000 first-class runs at an average of 42.89, 107 hundreds. And probably, I mean, what's he most famous for? Is he most famous for a 411-run partnership in 1957? Or is he more famous for walking out to the wicket in 1975, having been called up at the age of 41 to play a Test series with, reputedly... I don't think we've met, he said to Jeff Thompson. Hello, I don't think we've met. I don't think we've met. And there's actually a very, very good play by a man called Ian Smith, who is neither Ian Smuth of The Beerest of Margins, nor indeed Ian Smith, who plays Harold Bishop and wrote a number of extremely good episodes of Prisoner, the Forerunner to Wentworth, which is, for my money, the greatest single reboot of a TV programme there has ever been.
Okay.
No. It's not that Ian Smith.
It's the
another
guy
Ian Smith.
who stole a bunch of padding off some kid's trampoline to wear out to the middle to face Geoff Thompson.
That's absolutely right, but would you blame him?
No.
And in fact, actually, he wasn't wearing that much padding. He was just fat.
Okay.
He was 41 years old. He hadn't done much in the way of training, and he was continually ill, by the way, which is something I'm going to come to when I do this little story. But it is, of course, the legendary Michael Colin Cowdrey.
MCC.
And because we would have heard quite a lot about Michael Colin Cowdrey, I'm not going to dwell too much on the recall in 1975, because I think that's probably been covered on Storytime
Yeah,
quite a lot.
you're not going to do the arm in plaster heroics, non-heroics bit that you've done in depth.
I'm certainly not, because I've already done that, and
Yeah.
it's not an heroic. It's not an heroic, boys.
No.
He stood at the non-striker's end for 2 balls. I would have done that.
Anybody could
Any
have
of us would have done that. In fact, if he hadn't done that, he should have been banished, sent to Rwanda. That's the normal way of the matters these days. No, I'm not going to take you there, but I am going to...
Stop sending us your Colin Cowdreys.
Oh, no.
Said Rwanda.
Another public school cricketer's turned up at Kigali. No, I'm not going to do that.
Another
Don't sidetrack me.
remnant of Lord Kitchener.
Don't sidetrack me.
Okay.
I'm going to start with Ooty, because, of course, almost everything involving Michael Colin Cowdrey is opaque. It is uncertain, and it is often the way with posh boys that there's legend and there's whatever. So let's get back to Abhishek Mukherjee, because I said, Ooty. And I said, of course, Colin Cowdrey was born in Ooty. And he said, hold your horses one moment.
Oh.
I think you'll find he wasn't born in Ooty. So let's start at the beginning, and then I'll perambulate. And as evidence that Colin Cowdrey, whose Wikipedia page says was born in Ooty, it has been misrepresented that he was born in Bangalore. He was definitely born in Ooty.
Okay.
Abhishek Mukherjee has sent me a piece from the Star of India, I believe, from 1992, September 1992. This is how brilliant Abhishek is, because I got this within 30 seconds of sending him a tweet. Direct message. Colin Cowdrey, one of England's greatest cricketers, had a recent visit to India, and he will always cherish his sojourn, apparently. Cowdrey, the gentleman cricketer, has always valued things of the past, and he has deep roots in Bangalore. It was his place of birth 60 years ago, apparently. And I've got an actual hospital here that is named that he was born in. So Colin was born at the Lady Curzon Hospital and lived in Bangalore for 6 years before the family returned to England in 1938. Actually, 5.5, because he was born, by the way, on Christmas Eve.
Yep.
There's something about England's leading run scorers that they have to be born on either Christmas Eve or Christmas Day or New Year's Day. There's something I can't quite work out why that is, but it is. So to cut a long story short, here is documentary evidence of Michael Colin Cowdrey being in Bangalore, being taken around Bangalore as a guest of the BCCI to go back to his place of birth. However, just to check, I got hold of his brother, Chris Cowdrey, because no stone is left unturned in the pursuit of truth on the final word. And Chris Cowdrey said, oh no, he was quite definitely born in Ooty. So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know.
We don't know.
I don't know.
He doesn't know.
He
doesn't remember it.
No one knows.
He was being born. He was being thrust, screaming and terrified into a world that made absolutely no sense to a being that had spent its entire existence floating around contentedly in an amniotic sac. He wouldn't have known a thing.
He wouldn't have known a thing. But I find myself in a curious position of believing Abhishek Mukherjee more than I believe Colin Cowdrey's own son.
Sure. Well, family legend gets tangled up. People confidently say they repeat the things that they've been told, in the same way that we repeat descriptions of things when we were very young that we don't actually remember, but we build a memory of it because we've been told the story enough times.
Yeah, I think that's all of that is entirely true. There is a reason for the assumption that he's born in Ooty, and it's because his father, in one of those rather sort of fruity colonial ways, has a tea plantation in Ooty. So he was undoubtedly brought up in and around Ooty.
Right.
And has very fond memories of Ooty.
Sure.
Whether he was actually born there or born in Bangalore in this hospital, I tend to think when you actually name the hospital, there's a good chance that that's true.
Or it's just the only hospital that was there at the time, and so it's easy to say that it must have been there. Well,
exactly. And Ooty's not very far from Bangalore, so, I mean, probably took quite a long time in those days to get there. But if his mother was going to give birth in a hospital, almost certainly she would have gone into Bangalore to this hospital. And then he went to live in Ooty for 5 years. So that's Ooty sorted. Okay, let's just say he's got a connection with Ooty. Whether he actually emerged into the grim light of life, as E.M. Choran says, the great Romanian philosopher, the most depressing thing he's ever seen in his life is a pregnant woman in a graveyard, because all of those dead souls are so lucky and she's about to bring another one into this earth. He was a cheery fellow, E.M. Choran. Anyway, out comes Colin Cowdrey, wherever he first emerges, hangs out in Ooty, then is classic of the time, gets sent to a private school at the age of 6 years old. He's there from like 1938 to 45, so he manages to avoid the war through dint of being born wherever he was born at the right time. But there's a couple of little things I just want to point out on my way through this relatively brief perambulation. In 1946, the 13-year-old Colin Cowdrey played a 2-day game against Clifton School. 2-day game at Lord's. Like,
What?
Women aren't allowed to play cricket anywhere at Lords for years, right? Nursery ground, wherever. Colin Cowdrey, aged 13, pops along to Lords.
Yep.
Aged 13, scores 75 and 44, takes 3 for 58 and 5 for 33 with his leg breaks in a match that his side wins by 2 runs. An absolute thriller.
Wow.
Aged 13. So I raised this because, when people talk about, it must be quite difficult adapting to the big stage and, coming from taking your childhood dreams and then suddenly walking out at Lords or Edgbaston or wherever. Colin Cowdrey had been doing it from the age of 13 and played in a game in which he took the last wicket with his leg breaks in a thrilling 2-run win. So, it's
fun.
all water off a duck's back. MC Cowdrey, absolutely fine with that. By the age of 15, he's playing for Kent young amateurs against Sussex young amateurs and scoring 157. He's a child prodigy. He made 126 against the combined services, again at Lords in 1950. By the age of 17, this man had played about 10 days cricket at Lords, because every year they were playing Clifton, and now he's playing against the combined services. I mean, honestly, he's played more days of cricket at Lords than Lydia Greenway by the age of 14. Right. Make of that what you will. Right. He was selected for the 54-55 tour. And this was a surprise because he was very young and he wasn't expecting to play at all. And it was a famous tour when England did much, I suppose, a little better than they expected. Frank Tyson and all that. And he does score 102 out of a total of 191 at the MCG, which Bill O'Reilly called at the time the best 100 he'd ever seen. Now, we all know that people won't do a little bit of exaggerating in the cricketing world.
We all know that Bill O'Reilly didn't like Don Bradman very much as well. So.
And we all know that. But this is 54-5. So, I suppose, yes, he's basically saying, I've watched all those innings by Don Bradman, and this 23-year-old is way better. Well, actually, less than that, isn't he? He's 21 and a half, I think. He then scores 79 at Adelaide, but one of the recurring themes is illness, and he gets ill. And he's forever getting ill across his career. There's a whole bunch of tours he misses through illness. He has kidney stones. He misses half a season. He's a sickly fellow. Despite looking genial and puffy, he's sickly. And so sickly that in the time-honoured tradition of all-time cricketing greats, he gets invalided out of national service. So he goes to university and then sacks off university at the end because he realises he's going to play cricket. But that means you've got to do national service, you see. So he gets signed up for national service. Within a week, he gets discharged with, get this, rigid toes. I love this.
Horny feet.
I mean, not so rigid that he wasn't able to score 42,719 runs at 107.
He'll never be able to do anything with these toes. They're no good. They're no good, man. Can't get up and down.
In a beautiful, I wouldn't call it an irony, but I suppose it's just a thematic device that runs through his life. Do you know anything else about Colin Cowdrey and toes? I think you do.
Does he get him smashed by somebody at some point?
No. Better than that, his first wife, Penny Cheeseman, was driving the speedboat in, I think, Barbados that sliced Fred Titmus's toes off.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh. I mean, she presumably thought, who needs toes?
Yeah.
My husband has lasted perfectly well as an international sportsman without toes. Well, with rigid
medically
toes.
Condemned toes.
Think how much easier it would have been if he had no toes. So that's just a little aside.
Okay. It's a useful way to get invalided out of the military. It doesn't quite beat Chuck Fleetwood Smith, who got invalided out by getting drunk, stealing a military car, and then crashing it into the shit cart as it was collecting buckets of shit from the latrines, and was then invalided out of the military on that basis. But
he was invalided out on the basis of being covered in shit?
Basically on the basis of the fact that he got drunk and stole cars more often than they wished to be the case. So they said, maybe it's better for us if you're not in the military, but you're good at cricket, so you're not going to face any more consequences.
I'm sort of imagining the scene in Back to the Future when Biff crashes into the back of the manure truck.
I hate manure. Yeah.
where should I go from here? 411 run partnership at Edgbaston. I think everybody knows that. 285 not out for May. But of course, that partnership was one that necessitated a law change because the cunning devils worked out that you could just pad the ball away without playing a shot. So they had to bring in the playing a shot rule.
Is that the opening partnership? That one?
Well, no, it was a fifth wicket partnership, I think. Fourth, or was it fourth? Fourth wicket partnership, I think.
Yep.
So England were in terrible trouble. They had a massive first innings deficit, and they put on 411, of which Cowdrey got 154. Just as a little bit of an aside, he left Penny Cheeseman and instead married Lady Anne Howard, daughter of Bernard FitzAlan Howard, the 16th Duke of Norfolk, who just happened to be the tour manager for the 1962-3
Convenient.
Ashes. And also, of course, distant relative of Anne Boleyn, although, as was pointed out to me by the very great Adam Rutherford, we are all distant relatives of Anne Boleyn.
Is Anne Boleyn one of the ones who had the head chopped off?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
she was one of them.
There is a theme of amputation that we're finding in the wives of Colin Cowdrey.
That's right.
I'm getting
There's a lot of things being sliced off here and there. In Australia, in that 62-3 series, by the way, he made, I don't know if you're aware of this, he made 307 against South Australia in 360 minutes on his birthday, Christmas Eve. So strangely, in that tour, they played a tour game on Christmas Eve, which I wasn't aware of.
They played quite a lot of games on Christmas Eve. There were quite a few seasons. Some of the Test matches even have a day's play on Christmas Eve. And
but I kind of thought that they would. But I thought that's the thing. I thought it'd be like an international match rather than a tour game. But anyway, they did.
They just jammed the Test matches wherever in those days. They didn't have a sort of really a commercial idea that it has to be on New Year's Day so that people will come down and watch. It was just when it happened to get put on.
Yeah, and it worked for them perfectly fine, didn't it? On that tour, just a nice little echo of Bazball. He started with 3 ducks, and Jack Fingleton, the celebrated, obviously, player, but most importantly, journalist, wrote this up and said, he's very worried about Cowdrey's form, and he blamed his fondness for golf on these ducks. So Bazball's been around even longer.
Stop playing golf.
62 years. 62 years. There have been professional golfers with a cricket sideline turning up on tour and strapping on the pads. I go past the broken arm and the Lord's Test. Another nice little vignette in the 1970-71 Ashes series. While fielding in the 5th Test, he had his cap stolen. Cap stolen. I mean, you remember the hoo-ha over Warner's baggy green? Well, he made no hoo-ha, didn't Cowdrey. Just got another cap and just got on with it. But he had his cap stolen, which was a bit of a rum-do.
Yeah, right.
I've no doubt.
So someone comes out of the crowd and takes it off him and runs off.
Yeah, evidently. Yeah. Or maybe, I don't know the exact details. He might have been running after a ball and it might have flown off and then someone nipped on and nicked it.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, you know what you Australians like, you larrikins. You're basically the Bertie Woosters of the cricketing world, stealing a policeman's cap or Colin Cowdrey's cap.
Well, I mean, that's how the forfeit game, the Cleveland Texas Rangers baseball game that ends up in a crowd brawl in the 70s after the 10-cent beer night. That all kicks off because a drunk kid comes out of the crowd and tries to steal a cap off one of the players who then falls over while trying to get the cap back, and everybody in the dugout thinks that he's been decked by some thug, and so they all storm onto the field with baseball bats ready to smash the shit out of anybody who they can see, and the whole thing turns into a standoff with the crowd and versus both teams. It's quite a story. Go on. There's
hats at sport. It's weird, isn't it? The whole obsession with hats. People get very, very upset about this. I may have mentioned this before on Story Time, but the only baseball match I ever saw was the Philadelphia Phillies in 1995, and I actually was standing up because I'm terrified of American nationalism. But there was a man in front of me who was stood up for that, the wretched pointlessness of singing the anthem before every game of baseball, every thousands and thousands of games. And this bloke was standing up there, being quite respectful, and I could just hear this noise behind me. Take your hat off. Take your goddamn hat off. Take the hat off. Genuinely distressed that there was a man standing up for the national anthem wearing a hat.
Yeah.
But then I was nearly thrown out of a bar in Adelaide for wearing the wrong sort of hat. So, hats, it's all kind of
Dangerous.
weird, isn't it? Indeed. He had pneumonia for half the 1971 series, and he played what he thought was his last Test match that year against Pakistan at Edgbaston. We made 14 and 34. But then he is recalled, as you will have mentioned many times on Storytime, to go out there and face the wrath of the Aussie Pace Quartet with predictable consequences. And he's one of, I've got here, only 4 sportsmen to have memorial services at Westminster Abbey. And do you think you can guess any of the other 3?
Unlikely if they're British. Probably one of them was.
Well,
one of them did sailing.
that's the thing. 2 of them are not British.
Oh, Leary Constantine.
Correct.
There we go. I remembered something from Storytime. I don't even know where I remembered that from. That was in there. And then
another one is a countryman of his.
Okay. Who moved over to the UK? Not Headley.
Didn't really. I mean, he did live in the UK for quite a bit, but mostly playing club cricket.
Yep. Not Alf Valentine.
No.
No. Okay, tell me.
Probably their first black captain, Sir Frank Worrell.
Right.
And the last one's Bobby Moore, who captained the England 1966 World Cup football winning team. So I thought that was quite an interesting thing that 2 of the 4 were, very famous West Indians. And that is all I'm going to give you on Cowdrey, because it was a great fielder, he was a great player. You know an awful lot of those things, but I hope I've given you some of the things that you wouldn't have known. And especially to me, just how much bloody cricket an entitled child could get to play at Lord's. It slightly irked me when I was looking all this up.
So he's the first to play over 100 tests, isn't he? And then apparently he's sick for half of them. So imagine how many he could have played if he wasn't constantly falling over and coughing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, actually, he was in and out of the side with sickness, but also in the latter part of his career with sort of a loss of form, which you'd expect as you get older. But the other sort of interesting thing about him is that he wasn't like captain for a particularly long period of time. So he was kind of seen as a good egg. But England would periodically go to people like Close and Illingworth. I mean, he was in the good egg, Ted Dexter good egg, but occasionally the suits, the Quisling traitor Gubby Allen and the like, would think, oh, maybe we need to try somebody who's not a good egg, but is in fact a rambunctious Yorkshireman, and then they'd captain it for 3 games, do what they're supposed to do, which is win matches through ruthlessness, and then the Blazers would say, "Oh, I'm not sure I want to win quite like that. I'd rather lose gracefully. Oh, we'll have Cowdrey back for a couple of games." So yes, I mean, he captained at Kent an awful lot, but without an enormous amount of success. And then Kent found their success. Really, I don't think it's because of him, but after he retired, that's when they had their high point. But that is the man who may or may not have been born in Ooty, but is certainly connected to Ooty, who is one of the great cricketers of England, and whose wife sawed off the toes of Fred Titmuss, while presumably Colin Cowdrey said, "Well, I'd rather have no toes than rigid toes, old boy," in consoling him.
The toes were the hard-nosed winning captains. We can do without them. Well, I'm going to assume that 379 might be his cap number, given the way that England cap numbers pan out. But
oh yes, it could be. I didn't really address the number
really
because
the clue
was so clearly it had to be him.
Well, Jai Sharma, that is your 379. I hope that Daniel has scratched the itch that you wanted scratched about Ooty. If you want to send us a nerd pledge, of course, patreon.com/thefinalword, a very good time to get involved with a lot of things coming up in Final Word land. Going to go to a break. Before I do that, you wouldn't have a Colin Cowdrey shirt lying around because they didn't have names on the back at that time. But the good people at Westfield have this suggestion. If you have, for instance, sports team shirts gathering dust at the back of your closet, they say, do you have a Blake Bortles jersey from the time you went to the NFL at Wembley, a Harry Kane home strip you still can't bring yourself to look at or burn, or a Jack Leach test match shirt that you still don't know why you own because you don't remember where you got it? you can bring them down to the Westfield Good Festival, which is all about recycling, upcycling, turning things into other things, repairing things that you thought couldn't be repaired. And you can turn old sportswear into functional tote bags. I like this idea because you're probably more likely to put something in your bag and carry it around than you are to wear the books. So, says Sheehan of Westfield, you can put your library books in your Jack Brooks, your change of shoes in your Mark Hughes, and your fruit and veg in your Warren Hegg. If we didn't have sports shirt bags, what would we use to put things in? It's a great question, or one we haven't tackled on the final word yet. Westfield Good Fest, it's on at Westfield London from the 16th to the 19th of May. Visit goodfest.westfield.com for info and bookings.
Sorry, yes, I'll be heading straight there. You make a very strong point. I don't know why I've got these ridiculous old tote bags. I'm going to get myself... I think the Warren Hegg one was my favourite.
Yeah.
I mean, they were all good, don't get me wrong. But Hegg made me snort.
There we go. Well, snort away. Head down to Westfield, get involved. Let's break. We'll be back in a sec. It is the final word. It's story time 183. And after a perambulation around Michael Colin Cowdrey, I've got a nerd pledge, Daniel, that I've been looking forward to discussing with you. It comes in from Paul Frame. It is £2.90 in British currency. And Paul says, I've set a new nerd pledge of $2.90 to represent the number 29.05. If you get stuck, it's in reference to a cricketer who was excited about European politics during 1922.
This, I think I might know where this is going, and I'm getting almost pre-epic with excitement.
We've skirted around this, Adam and I, on a couple of episodes. Have made passing comment on this, but finally I get to get into this story in depth. Arthur Gilligan, Daniel, had a test bowling average of 29.05. That is our number. Let's get that out the way off the top. You may remember him as a genial England captain between the two world wars. You might also remember him as the English captain most associated with fascism between the two world wars. And there, I think broadly speaking, you could say from our vantage point at least, there aren't many good times to be involved with fascism, but probably between the two world wars is up there with the worst times to be involved with fascism, at least from the vantage point of history. Interesting, though, like you look up Arthur Gilligan and everything I could find, there are quite a few pictures of him, and they're all this guy with this huge genial smile, which is a bit too big. It's one of those smiles that, to me, is a bit shark-like. I can see too many teeth, and I can imagine the bottom jaw dislocating and him sort of being able to like a python, unhinge the jaw and swallow somebody of roughly equal size, which is kind of disconcerting. But, everything, all of the writing you find about him from contemporaries and so on is glowing. All the obituaries, all of the accounts, they all talk about what a lovely fellow he was and how he was the friendliest and the nicest and the kindest and the most genial and all the rest of it.
But there's something kind of like there is something a bit strange about fascism at this point. I know I'm making an odd point, but when it first kicks off in the early 20s, so don't think Holocaust yet. Think. I mean, the great Italian, the mad Italian who started the whole thing. And there's a superb biography of him called The Pike, which I read with great joy. And went to look at his house on the shores of Lake Garda, a complete maniac. But the sort of driving force of it was working class representation in a way. Obviously, it gets horribly distorted. But given his school, and of course I would happen to know what school he attended because I attended the same school. It was quite unusual for people at my school really to give two hoots about hoi polloi and what might be in their best interest. So it's possible that before people really understood what fascism was, he might have represented something that almost presented as progressive, which is a repulsive thing to think, of course, in 2024. But 100 years ago, they hadn't quite worked out what it was yet.
I'm going to get into this, and I think you are 50% right here and 50% wrong for reasons that, well, I think we need to set up the context here, which is that Gilligan is a massive posho, right? He's born in London. He goes to a public school, which one was it? What was the school?
Dulwich College.
College.
Same one as Nigel Farage. We spew out right wingers.
God. Captain's the first 11 just before World War One. He gets offered a second spot at Surrey, where it just so happens that his dear old dad is on the committee. Instead, the war breaks out, so he decides to join up, because that's what you do, to go and be an officer instead. Why be in the seconds cricket team when you could be a captain in the military at the age of about 18, which is what one does if one is posh enough. One joins the Lancashire Fusiliers, despite having never been to Lancashire, presumably, and never intending to go there. He joins the 11th Battalion, which is the same battalion that Tolkien is in, who remarkably isn't killed at the Somme and survives to write the books that go on to become so beloved, which always makes me think of like the things that so many other people who were killed would have done that would have been great, that we would have loved, except that never happened, so we don't know about them.
Well, I actually edited a book with a gentleman on exactly that subject called The 48, which is about a number of Surrey players, not all of them first teamers by any means, who died in the First World War, and among them was the great schoolboy cricketer of his time, I've forgotten his name now, who was so good, even at the age of like 17, 18, I think he was also a really good writer. And I think he lasted about a week at the front. It's rather tragic.
Yeah.
Tales of terrible woe. And captains got it in the neck just as much as privates in that war.
Yeah, they were all going
Majors,
over the top.
Majors fine. Majors are fine.
Yep.
Captains,
Not so much.
You don't want to be a captain or a lieutenant. Nasty, because you have to go up first.
Yep. So there's not much surviving of the British service records in that era, because most of it got blown up during World War II. The records office got bombed and caught on fire, so you can't really find out much about most people's war service. But old mate Gilligan's back playing first-class cricket by the May of 1919. Thematically, a lot of it's military. He's playing for Cambridge, and he's playing against the AIF, as the Australian Forces team, or the Army team, or the Free Foresters team, or the Navy team, and so on. Fast bowler at this point, he's batting 11 or occasionally 10, not doing much down there. And then Cambridge are thrashing Sussex in this game about 10 games into his career, bowled them out cheaply. They're 434 for 9. Gilligan walks in and smacks 100 in just over an hour from number 11. That's only happened 13 times in all first-class cricket in the entirety of the span that a number 11's made 100. So, it's an extraordinary thing at the time. He
feels quite fascistic, though, doesn't it?
A little bit.
I mean, it's so completely unnecessary by that stage. You're 434 for 9. You're on top in the game.
Yep.
Do you really need to do this, Gillis?
Do you need to make 600 against Sussex? Do you? No. But, he goes ahead and does that anyway. But I'm not going to go much more into his cricket, because that's not the point of interest that we're here for. Suffice to say, he ends up playing for Sussex after a little bit with Surrey. He gets better over the sort of usual trajectory. His seasons get better. He has a prominent role in a Test series win in South Africa. Immediately gets made vice captain because he's posh, and soon enough he's the captain. Lots of anticipation for this upcoming tour of Australia in 24-25, and he gets injured just before the tour, goes ahead and plays anyway, but he's ineffective, and they lose the tour 4-1. But this is the period when he's getting really into fascism, and like you say, there is a point of philosophical clarification that needs to happen at this stage. Don't get the British fascists that he joins up with, or as they eventually call themselves, don't get them confused with the British Union of Fascists, which is the Oswald Mosley lot, who do actually they're later. That's 1932 when they get formed, when Germany's bubbling over, and Mosley actually has black shirts marching on the streets in.
So they're more
numbers.
Nazi, are they? They're more sort of like taking from the Hitler playbook.
Yeah, very much, and running the anti-Semitic lines and leaning into that kind of antagonistic mode of it more, I suppose. This is really starting from 22, so it's a decade earlier, and it's a political concept, I suppose.
It's more Mussolini.
It's very Mussolini.
More Mussolini.
Yeah, so whatever's happening in Germany is very nascent at this point. It's very peripheral, but in Italy, Mussolini's got his march of supporters together. He's marched on Rome, and sort of within the mechanisms of actual power, the leadership in Rome have decided to give him a shot at running the country. Essentially, he's made the demand, and it's been answered. So the fundamentals of, fascism very poorly defined by Mussolini at this point. It's basically just anti-communist. Communism is bad. That's kind of the starting point, but it's also anti-capitalist to a point in terms of the unfettered market being able to run everything and make all the decisions. So it's like the base of it is that the state and only the state is the thing that's important. The people who make up the state need to be looked after as, the ultimate good has to be put before the individual good. Personal needs should be superseded. And, there is a level of subtlety. It's antagonistic and aims to, he's happy to achieve these aims by violence, but it's also against sort of full-bore free market open slather, because it's saying that even private companies should be subservient to the state. So it's pro-monarchy in a lot of senses. It's pro-centralised state leadership and nationalised industry and that kind of thing. It occupies a curious spot in the political spectrum.
It's also big into aesthetics, because the founding father of fascism, the chap called Gabriele D'Annunzio, who is the Italian who was the inspiration for Mussolini, and then I was going to say was never given the credit, although I don't know if you'd call it credit.
Where are my royalties?
He started it all, and there was this marvelous period in which and I can't remember the name of the town that he takes over.
Yep.
That's on the other side of Italy. It's very near Trieste,
right?
And he creates a gigantic kind of hedonistic sex city, in which
still there?
I don't know, and it's worth having a look, isn't it? In which he's very big on what they wear, and this is where actually Hitler takes from the playbook of Mussolini, takes from the playbook of D'Annunzio. So it's potentially peripheral, but there's a lot of it is to do with showmanship and how you look. And D'Annunzio was a poet and a playwright and a maniac, and it's all about the uniforms and the boots. And they are uniform. So you're absolutely right. It's about the sort of subjugation of the individual will to the broader body politic. But it is also strangely empowering for the people who are doing it, because suddenly you've got quite a lot of working class people who have been kitted out in some really fancy boots. And that seems to make quite a bit of a difference to their success.
It's interesting because I guess the original sort of thought of communism is that each individual worker is valuable and worthy and should be taken care of, and the idea of fascism is that each individual worker should be joining together to create this conglomerate on nationalistic lines. So there's a guy called Giovanni Gentile who's basically writing the philosophical basis for fascism after the fact. They're making it up. Having already taken power, Mussolini's got this guy sort of writing the principles of fascism after the fact, trying to to cobble together a coherent philosophical foundation, which is basically that you cure the ills of the nation by more nationalism. That's the best way to do it, right? So it's in this kind of mold that a lot of rich, privileged people in Britain decide that this sounds great. And so they form their spin-off group, which is initially trying to sound Italian, called British Fascisti, which then about a year later they changed to British Fascists because they think that it sounds too Italian and people are getting upset at them.
That's not very nationalistic, is it?
Curious relationship with the continent.
It's the wrong nation.
Not a new thing. The description I read of it said, despite its name, the group had a poorly defined ideological basis at its beginning, being brought into being more by a fear of left-wing politics than a devotion to fascism. Also, the ideals of the Boy Scout movement, with which many members had also been involved in their younger days, played a role. So Baden-Powell's got a bit to answer for.
Oh, God, yeah. Well, I mean, Baden-Powell's all about uniforms again.
Yeah.
And look, and they're quite dandified, aren't they? If you
dandy.
think about the toggles and the cravats, these aren't the sort of Chairman Mao uniforms. No. This isn't Stalin's rather drab outfits. No. This is what I mean. The outfits.
You've got tassels. You've got hems. You've
tassels.
got outlines.
Love a tassel.
You've got profiles. So the early membership of this British fascist group that Gilligan joins up they're very toff heavy. There's a viscountess, there's a few lords and a lady, a baroness, a marquess, an earl, a baron, various knights, a bunch of ex-military. You can't be in it if you're serving military, but former militaries. There are a few generals. There's a rear admiral. There's Colonel Sir Charles Rosdew Byrne, who is on the Grand Council while also being a Conservative MP for Torquay. So, it's just remarkable how it works. Tories and fascists.
So it sounds not together. That dissimilar to now, really.
Exactly. I particularly enjoyed this paragraph in a description that I found online. This domination by disgruntled members of the peerage meant that certain concerns featured centrally despite not normally being associated with the demands of fascism, such as anger at the decline of the large landowning agricultural sector, high levels of estate taxation and death duties, and the dearth of high-ranking civilian occupations considered suitable for the status of officers.
Yes, now you see that's not fascism as we come to understand it.
Not as we understand it.
No, because I don't think Hitler cared too much for keeping superannuated aristocrats. I think most of their stuff was sequestered. Yeah. The Junkers, as I think their class was known.
Totally, they're like the the people in Dune who get broken down for their water, that sort of thing. Just something to add to the common stores. Anyway, Tories and fascists having a good time together. It's not harmless. I mean, it is sort of comical in a way because it's literally just some rich people being angry that they're not being given enough by the establishment that they live within. But there are some real kooks involved. There's Nesta Webster, who's a huge part of the Illuminati conspiracies early. She's someone who writes a lot about the imagined conspiracies between the Masons and the Jews of the world, and the and that everything from the French Revolution through to World War I, through to everything else, is being run by this shadowy cabal for unclear reasons and all the rest of it. Lord Haw is a member of this group as well, the guy who goes on to do all the radio broadcasts for the Nazis and gets hanged for treason.
Oh, he's one of them, is he?
Yeah, he's in this group.
He's an early adopter. Right.
Yep. And ultimately this British fascist group disappears through Monty Python style, through splitting. It just splits and splits and splits until there's nothing left. Splitters!
So how many groups do we end up getting?
About
do we
8,
know?
I think.
Marvellous.
And it's pretty small to begin with.
That's quite like the modern Conservative Party, actually.
So they go, literally between 22 and about 26 or 7, the things wound up. But 1924-25, when Gilligan goes to Australia, it's very much operational, British fascists as an organisation, following the Italian vibe. And part of their mantra is you've got to proselytise. One of the rules is you're supposed to carry enrolment forms with you wherever you go to sign people up. You're supposed to carry pamphlets to convince people, and you have a responsibility to engage in conversation anybody who will speak to you about it, so that you can convince them of the good of fascism and why you should be part of it and why you should make them part of it. So
this is quite like the Jehovah's Witnesses, isn't it?
It's very, very much.
I mean, without the. I mean, I'm not suggesting the Jehovah's Witnesses are indeed fascists or particularly tough, but the same sort of requirement to proselytise. And indeed, when I was a member of the Revolutionary Communist Party back in the late 1980s, that we virtually never had meetings in which we discussed ideology. We were simply, it seemed to me, a pyramid selling scheme in which Comrade Toby, who worked in the city at the time, earning quite a lot of money, trading stocks and shares, would ask us to prove how many people we had converted to the cause, or indeed, most importantly, had signed up for a monthly subscription to Living Marxism.
Which I hope was just interior designs for the most part, I've redecorated in this charming brutalist style.
Hammer and sickle motif.
With these raw concrete walls, 3 sleeping mats side by side on which 7 of my comrades get their rest. So, it is like that. You're supposed to get out there and convert people. And so when Gilligan comes to Australia, he also has Frederick Toone, who is the tour manager, who's a Yorkshire cricketing administrator who's running the tour. He's also a member of British fascists. So the two of them are hand in glove as they come out to Australia. And there's a sort of intelligence branch called the Commonwealth Investigative Branch, based in the UK, and they're wise to this. And they tip off the Australian authorities and say, you've got to keep an eye on Gilligan and Toon because they're members of this fascist organisation. And it doesn't have the same loading that it has now because it's the 1920s. Fascism's, still this relatively recent thing. They're not exactly seen as enemies of the established state yet, but they're viewed with suspicion. They're still sort of king and country, so they're fundamentally on board with the establishment to a point, but they're different enough to make the establishment uncomfortable. So they tell the Australians to keep an eye on them, basically. And after the tour, officers recover from various places. They recover British fascist networking papers and enrolment documents that were evidently printed in London. And the only likely way that they made it to Australia and were distributed was through Gilligan and Toon. So that's the reasonable supposition, is that they were recruiting and they were trying to set up local chapters. And indeed, local chapters emerge soon after the visit. They don't last very long, but they do pop up in a few places, which gives support to the thesis. Anyway, those organisations fail. England also fail in the test matches 4-1. Gilligan doesn't captain with a great degree of intelligence. He's given a hero's welcome when he returns to London by the press, who are all very on side and say what a wonderful tour it was and how the English captured the hearts and minds of the Australians, although they didn't capture many of their wickets, and how it could very easily have been a very different result. And I mean, it's all a bit Bazball-y again, actually, that just the way they played was so wonderful. And especially Plum Warner, who's already on the final word shit list. He's a huge Gilligan backer. He pumps him up.
Of course he is.
He's got his hand down Gilligan's strides the entire time. He's ghostwriting stuff for magazines. He's all aboard the Gilligan train. So
can I just say how much I hate Plum Warner?
You can. On this show, you absolutely can.
Oh, man. It's just like, he just keeps cropping up. Him and Gubby Allen just keep popping into my head 3 or 4 times a week. I mean, I've got to let it go, haven't I? I've got to let it go.
Maybe you don't. I mean, if you're
not
even the most objectionable Warner in cricket, you're really working hard.
Yeah. Oh, dear. Plum Warner. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I'm fully supportive of that. I'm not a huge fan of the Plum myself. Now, anyway, I'm coming to the end of this because it's been a long sequences of thoughts. But later in 1925, Arthur Gilligan writes an essay for the British fascist publication, which includes the quote that for cricket teams on tour, quote, "It is essential to work solely on the lines of fascism, i.e. that the team must be good friends and out for one thing and one thing only, namely the good of the side and not for any self-glory," which is a confusingly naive understanding of fascism, even in the early stage, I must say.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think...
The point of fascism was the friends we made along the way.
Yeah. I mean, to the 2024 ear, that sounds a little strange. Yeah. I'm not going to defend him because I'm not in the habit of defending fascists, but I can sort of imagine, in much the same way as dear old Monty Panesar has been unfortunately used in a political experiment, he might not entirely have understood what he was getting himself into. And I think it's all rather sort of lovely to imagine communal activity working together, but then sort of underpinning that with an entirely different ideology, which is indeed fascism. Yeah. That's the downfall of it, really, isn't it? And so maybe he's just the Monty Panesar of his time.
That's kind of where I'm getting at. I mean, I think his version of fascism, as best as I can tell, hasn't broadened into the sort of rabid anti-Semitic version that the German variant very quickly becomes. But I also don't think we need to feel sorry for Arthur Gilligan as a poor, misunderstood youth who wandered into some difficult area. He's 30 years old at the time. He's had every advantage in the world to be educated and be worldly, and it didn't do him any harm whatsoever. He goes on he's one of the first radio commentators, a newspaper columnist, author of books. He runs Sussex Cricket Club in various capacities for years. He's MCC president at one point. His wife leaves him for being a philanderer, so he just marries a new wife. And he gets all those glowing reviews as being the nicest guy in cricket. So he seems to have a wonderful life regardless. He
Just one thing on the radio. Just one thing on the radio before you finish. There are a few pieces written about how Test Match Special has gone woke. Recently.
They're not hiring fascists anymore.
Well, yes, you see, and I think what it is it's a thinly veiled complaint that back in the day when Arthur was on the forerunner to TMS, because I don't think he was he on TMS by 1957? I don't know if he was still going. He did
some commentary in the 50s as well. Yeah, he's on the very first stuff in the 30s, and then he does. I'm pretty sure he does at least one series in the 50s.
Well, of course, TMS officially started in 1957 for the West Indies tour, but radio cricket was growing, and as you'll know if you from listening to Calling the Shots, people, I'm contractually obliged by Adam to remind people of Calling the Shots every time I'm on. But semi-seriously, he was on as an expert summariser, and in those days they basically had two, much as they did for many, many years. I mean, they had Truman and Bailey later on. They had two, and one was him, and one was C.B. Fry, who in his autobiography, written in, I kid you not, 1939, there is a chapter in C.B. Fry's autobiography called On Hitler. And it won't surprise you to discover that C.B. Fry was an enormous fan. And I think to be a fan of Hitler as late as 1939 is probably a worse crime than Arthur's crimes. But it did mean that if you tuned into radio cricket in those days, instead of having the appallingly woke Jonathan Agnew and Michael Vaughan and Phil Tufnell, you got some proper common sense thinking from C.B. Fry, big fan of Hitler, and Arthur Gilligan, member of the British fascists.
And that's the kind of straight talking that the kids of today need to grow up into the rounded individuals that we want them to become. Oh, God. Look, well, I can say for Arthur Gilligan, he doesn't appear to have, instigated any race-based hate campaigns through the rest of his life. He seemed to avoid that thing. He is MCC president during the Basil D'Oliveira affair, which is sometimes put up as a mark against him. But I think that's that 1 year term. You're a figurehead. It's fairly token. I don't think the MCC president's making calls about who's touring and all the rest of it, as opposed to the actual selectors at the time. But yes, all of the praise that you read about Gilligan comes from chipper sort of fellows who are of similar social standing. I did think it was interesting that they named a grandstand after him at Sussex in 1971, as late as that. Although when they redeveloped the ground about 10 years ago, Sussex very quietly allowed that grandstand to disappear, and it was not resumed in any form. So make of that what you will. But there you are. I was asked to explore the European politics of Arthur Gilligan, and I think we've done just that.
And he had a brother, didn't he?
Had a couple. He had two Gilligan brothers. The three of them all played for the school team at the same time.
Yeah. There's it's dreadful to admit, but it's true. And in our pavilion, I say dreadful to admit, it's just what public schools do. In our pavilion at Dulwich, there's all these little wood panels with the teams in them. So you can see Trevor Bailey in there because he went to Dulwich and whatnot, and Owen Morgan and Chris Jordan. And for some reason, I always pause over the one that's got multiple Gilligans and think, yeah,
if only we could put them all
birthright.
On an island. An island of Gilligan. This is The Final Word. Storytime 183. Geoff Lemon and Daniel Norcross. We will both be heading to the USA and the Caribbean pretty soon, in June. And if we do that, and if we need to get access to things that we can't access because we're not at home, we will be able to use a VPN, a virtual private network. And if you want one, NordVPN's the one that you can get a big discount for. It means that you don't let your paid subscriptions go to waste when you're away from home. Get your home content while traveling. Secure your connection on public Wi-Fi in airports, hotels, and cafes. And access 6,000 plus servers in 61 countries. That will all be something that we can do. Daniel, to get the best discount off your NordVPN plan, go to nordvpn.com/TFW. No risk. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and you'll help support the podcast. The link's in the show notes.
Well, do you know, and it is a thing that we need massively when we're away. I, for example, will. I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I like Doctor Who. I was brought up with it as a child. All right, I can't. There are some things in childhood that you can't just shake off, and so I've kind of got stuck with it. And there's a new Doctor, not new Doctor Who, a new Doctor, for that is his name, and Ncuti Gatwa, and I'm very excited by him. I saw his unveiling, and he's just thoroughly delicious. And we've got Russell T Davies back. And how am I going to watch this in the States? Well, actually, there's every chance I can watch it in the States early because these days the BBC sold off so many of its crown jewels to Americans that they get it before we do. But let's just say, for example, that I can't. And what I really need to do is get onto the BBC iPlayer, where there are so many splendid things, including county cricket coverage, every ball of every game throughout the domestic summer. As well as some splendid writing on the BBC Sport website and app.
I'm going to build them if you're flogging their shit on our show.
We have to do this. We work for them. Well, we don't have to do that. Anyway, what better way to keep in touch with what's going on back in Blighty for me than with NordVPN? Because now I can just be British again, but in America. And everybody knows that being British in America is apparently quite the aphrodisiac for people of a certain age and type. And who knows? I might be holding parties in my hotel room with lots of people who want to watch Doctor Who.
It might become like a certain town on the coast of Italy in 1922, where anything is possible.
Gee, why not? That's what I say.
All right, let us get into a couple more numbers. We've got to move through. I've been looking forward to seeing what you do with this one from Jack Rule. It is £2.11, 211. My number for you, he says, 211. Your clue: when an army ducking might just save some lives.
Yeah, now it's important here to just briefly run through my thinking. And I had a little bit of an initial failure because Jack is a very great friend of this program and indeed other podcasts. He is one of only, I think now, 3 listeners to Zero Ducks Given, and for that we thank him enormously. He's
33% of
he's
the
also
audience.
Well, exactly. And so, one makes sure one cultivates one's audience. For us, it's much easier than it is for you. So, and I love Jack dearly, and I've bumped into him a few times at women's games, and he is a prolific lover of women's cricket. He scores women's cricket. He goes to a lot of the games where I've seen him there. He's very knowledgeable about it. And so when I saw that Jack had sent this in, my first thought was, this is a woman, isn't it? This is a woman who's been in the army, who's got 2 for 11 or 211.
It was the duck, though. There had to be a duck involved.
I know that. Yeah, the ducking thing was causing me problems, and I've got to say that I did a lot of looking around and discovered, for example, that the entire Sri Lankan women's team in, I think it's 2014, were signed up to the army.
Or Air Force,
or Air Force. Yeah, in much the same way as in England, in order to avoid paying women to play cricket, we set up Chance to Shine, which is a fantastic charity. But by getting all the England women's team to work for Chance to Shine, that gave them just enough time to train as well as be very helpful in the community. But in Sri Lanka, what they did was sign them all up.
You want to start actually paying them for the cricket, then they'll get ideas about their station.
Exactly. Shikapandi was one I thought about. Shikapandi, you and I know. Because she was, I think, Air Force?
Yeah.
Australian,
big military,
Indian Air Force.
Something. She's always, she puts things on Twitter on Indian Army Day or whatever it is.
Yeah, so I went down that path a lot, and you kept counselling me to think harder about army games. It'll be an army game. You're right, it's an army game.
Because he capitalises army, and I've looked at so many scorecards where it's the Army 11 versus blah blah blah, and I mentioned some of them with Gilligan playing Army 11s.
You're absolutely right, but the thing is, I've been so how can I put it, scarred by being on this program, that the idea that there might be actually something literal come through to me, as opposed to something completely blindingly impossible, I kind of discarded it. Going, no, it can't be the army, Geoff. Good
Can't be
God,
what the
that was so
word
naive.
means.
No, it's probably like the first letter of army is 1 in
Right.
Scrabble, and R is like 2, and M is 4 or something.
Yeah. Well, all vowels are 1. R would be a 2.
Oh, shit,
M's
I don't want
worth
to...
3 points. Y is worth 4, I think.
3, is it? Right, and I've suddenly realised that I've given the listeners ideas here, which is a disaster.
No, please don't. Please don't do that.
So, no, we don't need any more ideas out there. So anyway, in desperation... in desperation... I decided you were right. I decided you were right. I thought, let's give Geoff's idea a go. It seems too naive, but I'll give it a go. So you came up with a scorecard, which you sent through to me. And simultaneously, I had sent through a request to, you'll never guess, Abhishek Mukherjee.
Leave him alone.
No. It's what he's there for. Well, and other things as well, being a lovely human. But I thought, if it is the army and it involves ducking, if anybody's going to have written something about the army playing and ducking somewhere, it'll be him. And then you sent through a scorecard, and the scorecard, sure enough, had the army being out for 211.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, now hang on, this is too much of a coincidence. We got army, we got 211. Yep. July the 29th, 1944. And in fairness to Jack, when I went back to him for a subsidiary clue, he did say, as his subsidiary clue, that it concerns how we like to while away the winter. So I knew that he was referring to, because he's very good on the Winter War.
Yes, your conceit that the 6 months of the winter become the 6 years of World War II.
Which enough listeners are familiar with for me not to go into, but... Because that briefly sent me on a kind of digression when I thought, hang on, the 2nd of November would have been around about the 13th, 14th of September, so 1940, so that would have been the Blitz. And then the 21st of January, if it was 21-1 rather than 2-11, that gets us sort of into the late weeds of the Italian campaign, but it didn't quite match up with Hedley Verity's wounding and subsequent death at Monte Cassino. This is what this program's turned us into. Completely.
This is a very World War heavy episode, I've got to say. We've had a few.
It is, well, and the thing is, this is World War heavy again. Because you were dead right when you sent me that scorecard. I didn't quite know why, though. And Abhishek came up trumps.
My main concern was that there were no ducks. There were no noughts. There was a naught not ours, but there were no ducks.
No, there were no ducks. No. None of them. Don't you worry about that. So I say to Abhishek, is there anything about the match between the Army and the RAF on the 29th of July 1944 that might make this clue make any sense to you? And I think it was within 15 seconds this time, as opposed to 30, that he sent me the link to his piece on Cricket Country.
Right.
And it solved the problem. This is solved, folks. This isn't even Sergeant Pepper, which to my mind I thought was solved, and I'm very disappointed wasn't quite, but it's good enough to pass muster. This is the solution, right? In that match on the 29th of July, 1944, you have to imagine we're late-ish into the war, but D-Day only took place on the 6th of June, so this is only like 7 weeks after D-Day. There's a hell of a lot of fighting to be done. The trajectory of the war is very much in favour of the Allies. They're going to win. The Nazis are toast, but they're going to take a long time losing, and they're going to kill an awful lot of people in the process. And it's going to be ugly and dreadful. And at the time, they'd kind of run out of planes and the making of planes, the Germans. Right. I mean, they hadn't not literally run out of planes, but
they were no longer...
No, they weren't really fighting a conventional air battle like they had in the early 1940s, and especially the Battle of Britain. They were doing it in favour of doodlebugs, V1s and V2s.
Oh, right, the Werner von Braun specials.
That's right. And the thing about them was they're kind of pilotless, and they fly through the air, and they make a noise. And my father talked to me about them at great length, and grandfather. And they make this sort of like noise. Well, I don't know if it's that noise, but a noise of some kind.
Very much the Dumb and Dumber, do you want to hear the most annoying noise in the world sort of noise.
That's exactly it, only that comes also supercharged with death and obliteration. And so it makes the noise, and then when it stops making the noise, you know you're in trouble, because once it stops making the noise, it's going to land somewhere and it's going to explode. So on the 29th of July, 1944, the Army play the Air Force at a match at Lord's, which you may think is quite unusual, because we are still in the war. I think Abhishek tells me that 3,800 people turned up for it. So really, really quite a sizable number of people turn up. And bear in mind that Lord's is open for cricket in a way that the People's Home of Cricket, the oldest test ground in London, the Oval, is a prisoner of war camp. So, we in South London are really fighting the war effort. Lord's, being Lord's, they're still drinking champagne, having a laugh. I say, why don't we have a game of cricket in the middle of a war?
Frippery.
Yes, let's have a game
They're
of
doing nothing.
cricket.
Not putting the nation first. What they needed was a little bit of fascism, just to clarify the thinking about the primacy of nation.
And guess what? Plum Warner turns up again, because during the war, not concerned too much with the actual fighting of the war. He's concerned with the lack of cricket. So he founds the British Empire 11. Desmond Donnelly starts the London Counties 11. They're trying to play games. They're trying to get stars to play against each other. And some matches are played to raise money. Some others, says Abhishek, to help revive the spirit of the English. For what better way was there to boost one's morale? And in fact, in fairness, I think he's right. So, a galaxy of stars are collected at Lord's in 1944. A crowd of 3,100, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if you bear in mind that there are bombs floating about. It's a lot.
If a V1 lands in the middle of the ground, that's a lot of people to be gathered in one place.
It really is. It's health and safety not gone mad.
Gone mad in the other direction.
Both teams boasted of stars. The Army was represented by quisling traitor Gubby Allen, Godfrey Evans, a very young Godfrey Evans at this point, Maurice Leyland, not young at all, and he, of course, scored that 187 in the 1938 Oval Test match, so he was well-known and fated. Dick Pollard, Jack Robertson, who would go on to open the batting in first-class cricket for quite a while, Charlie Palmer, who we've come across on previous story times. And the RAF had Wally Hammond. Had Simpson, Reg Simpson, Bob Wyatt, the great Bob Wyatt, Dave Townsend, Les Ames, Charlie Barnett, and Bill Edrich. And Bill Edrich was taking a bit of time off from actually fighting, because Bill Edrich did do stuff. He wasn't, Jack Hobson in the First World War, or indeed the rigid-toed Cowdrey. He got in a plane and fought.
D.G. Bradman on the home front, etc.
The match started at 2 p.m. Army openers Robertson and Harry Halliday batted grittily, which is also a lovely little note, because having gathered 3,100 people for an exhibition match of stars, I'm sure they really, really appreciated some gritty batting.
Well, I will say, in some ways, in the way that the V1 or V2 rocket makes such an annoying noise, that in some ways, when it lands on you, there is in that a small mercy, in that you no longer have to hear the sound. Perhaps there might also be a similar mercy if you're watching an incredibly dour, dismal opening partnership that's put on 11 in the first hour, and then it comes to an end.
Well, I've got the scorecard here, and I'll come to it in a minute, because it wasn't exactly high scoring or rapid paced. Harry Halliday, which is a great name, like a musical.
Harry Halliday. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen, fresh from Las Vegas.
With his talking dummy, Lord Thwank. Anyway, Halliday hailed from Pudsey, which of course we know as Len Hutton's birthplace. But on this occasion, we're told by Abhishek, it did not build his reputation of the place, which I rather like. Anyway, they get to 57 for 1. Flight officer Wyatt is bowling to Lieutenant Robertson, and then it happened. So, at this point, says Abhishek, it was almost certainly a German aircraft that had managed to enter British airspace and was hovering somewhere behind the clouds. For of course it is cloudy, because it's England. Excuse me. It was designed to fall and explode the moment its engine was cut off. So that's hence the noise. Once the noise stops, bang. the players flung themselves on the ground. Ducking, my friend. They're ducking.
The
They're
army
ducking.
fielding at this
and
point?
there is a picture. I think the army are batting. I think the Air Force are fielding. Is that right? Oh, no, hang on. I think. Oh, you might be right. Yes, you're absolutely right. It's the other way around. So the army's up, but then the bowlers, everyone's ducked. The whole lot. Army, Air Force. Probably the umpires stayed upright because that's the way of these things.
They're usually too old to get it out on the ground.
Yeah. Oh, down in installments. Creak. Yeah. Arthur Fagg making his way in a statuesque way to the ground. Anyway, there's a picture here. There's actually a picture of them on the ground. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it.
It does look like people wearing white lying on the ground. Yep, I believe that.
It's people wearing white lying on the ground. So there they are, ducking from the doodlebug. And I'll give you the scores in a moment. But just so as you understand, the Army continued to play after this, and the Air Force, for that matter, for it is actually the Army that's batting, and it's the Air Force that's in the field. Bob Wyatt takes 5 for 81. What I love the detail about this is that down they go. Bomb explodes. There's a slight difference of opinion on where it landed. It either landed in Regent's Park, which is about 600 yards away, or it landed on the road 200 yards away. Either way, there is a picture of a plume of smoke rising from behind the nursery end at Lord's.
Usually that's just Phil Tufnell.
Yes, but also usually you'd like to think that might necessitate the abandonment of the game, mightn't you?
Not in
these
1944.
fellows. No,
that's old hat.
Absolutely not. It's about 5 minutes before they just get on with the game, which I adore. I adore this.
Loved it.
So,
these days they go off for lightning. I've got to end the scourge of cricketers being electrified by lightning. The hundreds of fallen ranks of lightning-struck cricketers. This is the real stuff.
Only one of you is going to get struck by lightning as long as you're standing, as long as you've got Curtly Ambrose out there
wearing
and you just
a metal hat.
Get down on the ground. It ain't going to be you, is it? Whereas a V1 or V2 doodlebug is going to take out a lot of you. It's not lightning. Lightning's fine. You got a 1 in 15 chance when you're out there. Actually, there's all the spectators. There's a whole load of people who could take the rap for you. Whereas no, a doodlebug is problematic. So I'll run you through the scores. 211 for 8 declared in 57 overs, which I suppose was seen as quite good going in those days. But frankly, if I'm risking life and limb to be in the audience for 3,100 with doodlebugs dropping, I'd like them to show a little more urgency. 5 for 81 for Bob Wyatt, who, of course, famously broke his jaw, didn't he, against the Australians, I think, I forget which year. Broke his jaw, I think he top-edged right into his face. Edrich bowled, who have now, of course, has a stand named after him. And the Royal Air Force, in response, and bear in mind, the Royal Air Force, this middle order, well, actually, I got to get the whole of their team, the Air Force, an astoundingly good team. Charlie Barnett, Reg Simpson, a fellow called Brooks, Wally Hammond, Bill Edrich, Les Ames, Bob Wyatt. I mean, that's a seriously powerful batting lineup. I don't suppose they've had an enormous amount of practice, but, Pollard takes 4 for 33. The Quisling traitor, Gubby Allen, gets Brooks LBW for 22. I'm guessing he was missing another set, if I know Gubby Allen. And the game, of course it does, ends in a draw. 129 for 9. After 35 overs in response, because they batted too long. The Army went on to get 211 for 8 in their 57 overs, only leaving the Air Force 35. So they weren't even trying to make a Sunday afternoon game of it. Do you know what I mean? Come on, declare at 50, right? And there's been a fucking doodlebug. Right? Do you think the result matters that much? We've just survived an air raid by the Germans, and you're going, no, I think we're bad on another couple of overs. I don't fancy our chances of keeping Hammond and Ames.
I'm a little bit nervous here.
I want to draw. Want to draw at the very best.
Be out there for the shortest possible time, I would have thought would be the edict. Right.
Yeah. So there you have it. That's 211. That's the army ducking, and that's saving lives. That's a doodlebug.
Beautiful.
And that's the war. A war, I tell you.
Beautiful. I love it. Well done. Enjoyed that. I've got Jagannathan Tiruvallur Eachambadi with $6.05 in USD. Initially, I thought 605. I thought 2019 World Cup, because there were quite a few players who made 600 plus runs in that tournament, and I was almost right. Shakib Al Hassan made 606 runs in that World Cup, not 605. But as best I could work out from the names, I thought Tiruvallur and Eachambadi suggest a Tamil background, not a Bangla background, so it's not likely to be a Bangladesh player. Warner made 647 runs in that World Cup. Rohit Sharma made 648. Neither of them went past Hayden's 659 back in 2007. Tendulkar's 673 in 2003, and Virat Kohli with 765 last time around went past everybody, which still boggles my mind when I think about it. Kohli made 765 runs in the last World Cup.
And they still didn't win.
Everybody's forgotten about it.
It's a bit like how he's got... And hasn't he got the, I forget, orange or purple cap in the IPL at the moment? And he's playing for one of the teams who's definitely not going to win.
Down the other
I mean... I guess you've either got to ask yourself, is Virat Kohli scoring lots of runs
not helping?
In which case, what the hell are the rest of you doing?
I think it was helping.
Or is it not helping?
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, it's weird, isn't it?
I think broadly speaking, it did help. 11 innings.
A bit Brian Lara-ish, isn't it? You know, a bit like when Brian Lara was scoring.
Yeah, but imagine if Brian Lara were playing in a team with
India
a bunch of
really
other good players.
Well, I know. This is what's extremely perplexing, isn't it? But I suppose that's for an entirely different podcast.
11 innings in that World Cup, 9 scores above 50, including 300s. Ridiculous. Anyway, it's the kind of, someone else might take 2 years in one-day cricket to make 765 runs. Players make 3,000 or 4,000 in a career, and he's gone close enough to 1,000 in one tournament. But only one country could have a 605 cap. That's Ian Ward, which is kind of hilarious in a way that Ian Ward very much feels like a player of a much previous era, and yet his cap number is still about 150 ahead of the most recent Australian cap number. I think the Australians are up to 460. Something.
Have I told you my very brief digression? Have I told you my theory about what shirt numbers should be?
No. Maybe.
I think shirt numbers should be the last 2 digits of your cap number. And in the very, very rare occasions, and it won't have happened very often, Graham Gooch, I think, might have managed it, but Jimmy Anderson has.
There's 100 between them.
When you debut, and whenever you play from that point on, your shirt number is your full cap number. But otherwise, you're just the last 2 digits. And I think it gives you a really good numerical representation of the age of your team. And I think that would be really, really lovely.
I don't mind it.
But no one does that. They just let people wear 66 because he's called Root, and it's it's a pun. Or Sam Curran can have 58, which doesn't mean anything to any of us.
What does 58 mean? Wouldn't have a clue.
No. Anyway, sorry.
605 is our number, remember. Stuart Broad took 604 test wickets, not 605. It sort of felt a bit like a Smith or Labuschagne average at one point. Smith did once average 60.58 cumulatively, but that was only for a brief period. They've both fallen down from
Was there a clue?
There was no clue with this. I just had 605. So eventually I ended up at the fact that only one team's ever made 605 in a test match, which is Australia in Barbados in 2003. This is the match before they concede the record run chase in Antigua when West Indies make 418, which still stands as the record fourth innings chase. The match before there's plenty of runs as well. Australia 605, batting through 155 overs. Ponting makes a ton. Steve Waugh makes a ton. It's that period just after the Richard Dawson Sydney 100 where he's a bit liberated and he makes a couple of hundreds against Bangladesh and this West Indies one and goes from 29 to 32 test hundreds, having equalled Bradman on 29. One problem, West Indies have conceded 605. Their other problem is that Brian Lara is sick. We were talking about sick players before. Well, he's sick. Late 2022, he collapses during a match in the Champions Trophy in Colombo and apparently has hepatitis and ends up in hospital. So this is a few months after that. This is April 2003, I think. And they're very vague about it. Even now, you can't really trace what he actually had. Some of the reports at the time say chicken pox. Others say that the chicken pox report is wrong. He's got a fever. He's confined to bed. Nobody knows quite what it is. Mystery illnesses during tours of the Caribbean are a point of interest for this podcast, but I wouldn't suggest that it's necessarily along those lines.
Maybe he was born in Ooty.
He was born in Ooty and he never recovered.
Maybe it was him, after all.
Recovered. But even without Lara, the Windies they're going okay initially. They've got Chris Gale and Devon Smith who bat through to stumps on the second day, take the partnership on to 139, and then a couple more wickets fall, but they're 4 down with 245 on the board going into the last session of day 3, I think it is. And then a couple fall quickly, and Lara has to get out of his bed and come out to bat at number 8,
like Eddie Painter.
And he's crooked.
Oh, is he wearing a cravat?
I don't think. But style points. He did the style with his batting, and he looks pretty good coming out to bat at number 8. Lasts a bit over an hour, and then he gets absolutely shot down by umpire Venkat. He smashes the ball into his pads and gets given out LBW just before stumps. So West Indies still, their first innings lasts into the 4th morning of the game. They're finally out for 328 after 129 overs. And so what does Steve Waugh do? Enforces the follow-on.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I suppose you're running out of time, but at the same token, I would have thought maybe give the lads, do what the West Indies did in 1976, which is after England scored 400 and something in reply to 650 odd, they went out and batted for 32 overs, scored 186 for none, and just gave a session for their bowlers to chill out.
That's what I would be thinking. But Steve Waugh was not. We've talked many times on the show about the myth that Australia stopped enforcing the follow-on after Kolkata, and I have pointed out many times that Steve Waugh enforced the follow-on at every single opportunity that he had as captain after Kolkata. Every time.
Is that right?
Every time.
Is that right?
Kolkata was the first time he had the chance to enforce the follow-on as captain, and he subsequently
did it every other time
7
afterwards.
more times and won every one of those matches. So,
yeah, well, I mean, he doesn't strike me as a man who's going to be put off by failure. In fact, the exact opposite is going to happen. He's going to double down, isn't he?
He'll be like, well, they got us that time, they're never going to get us again. So he enforces the follow-on on this occasion, which means that Jason Gillespie, having just bowled 21 overs in the first bowling innings, then bowls another 28 and takes 4 wickets.
Imagine the sweat off those lustrous locks.
Glenn McGrath bowls 18 and 18. Brett Lee bowls 25 and 15. And luckily they've rejigged this team so that a rare thing for this Australian side, Gilchrist is batting at 6 and Andy Bickle is batting at 7. So they've got a spare fast bowler. Bickle bowls 16 and 12 overs and gets Lara out both innings. So he's key in that sense. But in the 3rd innings after the follow-on, Ponting bowls, Steve Waugh bowls, even Lehman bowls. They're trying to get through. They're trying to give their guys a break. And most importantly, Stuart McGill bowls 1 ball shy of 40 overs in the first innings and takes 4 for 107, and then turns around and bowls another 36 overs in the 3rd innings and takes 5 for 75. So he's ended up at, 75.5 overs and taken 9 in the match. He's man of the match for making it happen. It looks like the Windies will bat out a draw, but there's a rush of wickets just after tea on the last day. They're all out for 284. They've batted for so long that they actually get very narrowly into the lead by 7 runs, which means Australia have to chase 8 to win. But that does allow Jermaine Lawson, having dismissed Lee and McGill with consecutive deliveries 3 days earlier, to get Justin Langer LBW with the first ball of an innings and secure a hat-trick, probably one of the least satisfying hat-tricks in the history of Test cricket.
Oh, why has that passed me by? That's magnificent.
with 7 to defend.
Oh man, I mean that is actually the worst hat trick you can ever get, isn't it? I mean it's a hat trick. unlike Jared Kimber's dad's hat-trick, which if anybody's unfamiliar with Jared Kimber's dad's hat-trick, he claims because he took the last 2 wickets of the semi-final the week before in consecutive balls, and then took a wicket with the first ball he bowled in the final. It's not a hat-trick. It's not a hat-trick.
It's not.
It's different, mate. You cannot do that. You cannot do that, Jared Kimber's dad, Pete. You cannot. You cannot do that. You cannot do that, Ben Stokes. No, you cannot do that. So that is not the worst hat-trick ever. The worst hat-trick I think I've ever seen was Stephen Finn getting 2 caught at long on, long off, and one was like a deep third in a one-day international. But this will be the most unsatisfying hat-trick. Wasn't it? Something like that, yeah. But this will be the most unsatisfying hat-trick, I imagine. Did he even know he got it?
I'm not sure. I mean, it was days in between. They'd been batting for days and days.
Of course. It
would have been the middle of day 2 when he took the first 2 wickets, and then the end of day 5 he takes the third.
In a totally losing cause. Having been really disappointed because it looked like they might have saved the game. If only Shannon Gabriel hadn't. Why did he do that? Although it wasn't Shannon Gabriel, but I bet there was a really terrible shot in there somewhere.
He made a Test 100, didn't he, Jermaine Lawson? At one point,
he has got a strange. He's got a strange old career, Jermaine Lawson.
I'm pretty sure he's the answer. I think on 2 different occasions I've asked Andrew Sampson a question about. No, it wasn't Jermaine Lawson. It was another West Indies bowler. Who?
Taylor.
Jerome
Taylor? Was he called Jerome? Jerome, not Jermaine.
Yes,
Jerome.
That's right. I remember saying to Sampson, who do you think, who's the worst player who's ever made a Test 100? And immediately he sort of, in his kind of muttering way, went, Jerome Taylor. And I think another time I asked him, is Stephen Finn's won the worst hat-trick? And he said, maybe Jermaine Lawson. And I kind of didn't think to look it up until, and this week is the first time I've realised what he meant by Jermaine Lawson taking the worst hat-trick.
Yeah.
2 wickets against a team, the last 2 for a team that's already crossed 600, one of whom is Stuart McGill, and then the next one while defending 7 on the last day. Anyway, that's probably not the answer for Jagannathan, but it might be. That is my bid for you for 6:05. Let me know. And just quickly before we go, I've got Fran on our list, friend of the show, $3.61. And I had this on the list mistakenly because Fran's 361 was there years ago for which we'd answered years ago. And then for some reason I misinterpreted something and thought it was a new number and put it back on the list. And I realised this while we were prepping the show. But bugger it, we might as well give Fran a little extra value here because Fran, as a younger woman, was very much in love with Darren Gough. And this is something she will admit openly. And that the 361 was the 3 for 61 that he took in Sydney when he took his hat-trick, his innings figures with 3 for 61. And without doxing Fran, I will say that as evidence, she tendered the fact that her youthful email address was an address that indicated this love for Darren and this anticipation of a happy life together. So I thought that since we're here and we've already answered 361 about 5 years ago, why not ask Daniel Norcross if he has something extra to offer on Darren Gough that Adam and I haven't been able to offer yet?
Well, you asked me that, and I instantly went back into my memory bank.
You messaged Abhishek Mukherjee. Got anything interesting about Darren Gough?
No, I could just about remember. In fairness to me, I wasn't as au fait with the Army versus the RAF in 1944 as perhaps I might have been, nor indeed the birthing controversy around MC Cowdrey. But on this occasion, I delved into my thoughts, and my brief was really, things about Darren Gough that perhaps we forget, because the hat-trick we remember, the tongue we remember. We also remember the spooking of Shane Watson in T20 in 2005. The spooking of Shane Watson. A brief digression on the spooking of Shane Watson. I don't know if I've ever told this story before, but Sean Tate came onto Test Match Sofa years ago during the 2013 Ashes series. And I think there was a game in Durham, wasn't there, in that series? And we were talking about Durham and Lumley Castle. And I said, you must have been around. when Shane Watson was spooked. And he said, yeah, he had to go and sleep in Britt Lee's room. He was so scared. I said, oh, that seems so odd, doesn't it, for a big old burly Australian, bowler, batter. We always think of you Australians as you're surrounded by crocodiles and vicious spiders. And how could you possibly be scared by something that doesn't exist in a castle? Sorry for ghost truthers out there everywhere, but they don't. And he said to me in typically Sean Tate laconic fashion, he went, look, Dan. And he genuinely did say that. Look, Dan. Shane was the kind of kid that slept with the nightlight on, which I considered to be the greatest put down that any Australian could give to any other Australian. I believe that that's not a great reputation to have. But so I sort of discounted all those while actually just mentioning them right now. But there are a couple of things that I don't think he's given anything like enough credit for. And one of them is he was man of the series for England in Sri Lanka. And England had this really weird period. In 1999, they were the worst team in the world, and they were famously booed off at the Oval. I was there on the last day when they lost to Chris Cairns's.
Yep.
I say Chris Cairns's. He wasn't captain, but he was there.
Five
New
for
Zealand.
80 in the game. Is it that one?
I think it may have been. But that's why he comes to my mind. But in 1999, it was quite shocking actually, because to see an England team booed, they'd lost plentifully, but
Arthur Gilligan got
cheered. Fairly sanguine.
This lot.
Yeah, exactly. Well, English are perpetually sanguine about losing cricket matches because it doesn't actually matter in England, because football matters and cricket's a pastime with picnics and things. But this was just going too far. We were the worst team in the world. We were below Zimbabwe, that was the thing. And they'd lost to New Zealand in a home series, which had been done before under the great Jeremy Coney in 1986, but it just felt awful. And a year later, they won 4 series consecutively, and 2 of them were series that, I mean, at the time, you wouldn't have given them a prayer in. There was the Pakistan series, the famous Karachi in the Dark test match with Hussain and Thorpe. And then they go to Sri Lanka, which is a no less difficult challenge at that time. It's a proper Sri Lankan side. You had Jayawardena, Jayasuriya, Sangakkara, Muralitharan, Chimanda Vas. There's a proper team. And they lose the first test match abysmally by an innings. I mean, there was almost certainly some insane umpiring decisions, because there always were in Sri Lanka. I don't think that's a series that Alex Stewart was given out leg before to a ball that Rob Moody puts up frequently and just cackles with laughter, because it is genuinely the funniest LBW you will ever see in your life.
Bowling, is it? Yeah.
Jayasuriya is bowling over the wicket to the right-handed Stewart, and it pitches a full metre outside leg stump. I'm not even sure it hit him in line when he was playing his free shot to the leg side and missed it. And he was given out, and he looks quite baffled. They just introduced the lines on the pitch on the TV, so it was awful. But anyway, in 2000 they go to Sri Lanka and they lose the first test match. It was bad, but it wasn't massively surprising by an innings. But they come back and they win 2-1, and they win in large part because of Darren Gough, who in the second test at Kandy, and bear in mind when you watch test matches in Sri Lanka now, Sri Lanka will literally pick Saranga Lakmal to bowl 5 overs, and then it'll just be spin. And it wasn't massively different then, except they had Chimanda Vas, who was good. But then they'd have Dharmasena, Jayasuriya, and of course Murali. So the pitches were designed for spinners, and spinners were taking all the wickets, except for Darren Gough, who in England's comeback victory in the second test took 4 for 73 and 4 for 50 as England won by 3 wickets, which is amazing. And then in the next game at Colombo, he takes 5 for 56 over the course of the 2 innings, as England win by 4 wickets, chasing 74 in a low-scoring clash. They bowled out Sri Lanka for 81 in the second innings. He was man of the series. For a fast bowler who was batting at number 11, to be man of the series in Sri Lanka is, frankly, ridiculous. I don't know how it happens. Other great memories, 1998 at Leeds. That was where England actually benefited from a completely ridiculous LBW decision themselves. And it might have been the one that Darren Gough took to finish the series. England, another come-from-behind win. They'd lost the first test quite convincingly to South Africa. And they win the 5th test at Leeds. There's no oval test against South Africa in 1998. So the 5th and final test takes place at Leeds. And Gough took 3 for 58 and 6 for 42, in the process taking his 100th test wicket. England win by 23 runs. It was one of the most, I was 29 at the time, just one of the most exciting test series because South Africa were proper. They're Donald and Pollock, and they were real. There was that sort of high point of South African cricket before the quota system, when they were using unabashed public school boys, white public school boys, who had all been given all the great opportunities in life and were very good. But England somehow, a pitiful England that the following year would be the worst team in the world, somehow managed to win 2-1 thanks to Darren Gough. That would be another great memory. And then 2 other memories I'm going to give you. One is the Lord's Test of 2000, which is one of the most fun test matches that I can remember watching. It's the 2-day test when West Indies are bowled out for 54 in their second innings. They had a really good lead after the first innings of about 130. Then they're bowled out for 54. Gough is instrumental in that. He takes some of the wickets. It's Dominic Cork who ends up being man of the match. But he comes in with England 160 for 8, needing 191 to win in the second innings. On a pretty gloomy day at Lord's, and I was working in a terrible job at the time, and our boss was out, so we just whacked the cricket on and watched it. And it was a really brilliant, gritty, strange partnership. Goughy only got 4 out of 19 balls, but Cork at the other end got 35. It was Ambrose and Walsh. Walsh took 11 wickets or 10 or 11 wickets in the match. And England still hadn't beaten the West Indies, incidentally, at this stage in a test series since, like the early 70s, I think. Because they'd drawn in 95, they'd drawn in 91, they'd come back from the terrible blackwashes, but or indeed, Viv Richards calls 1984, incidentally, the whitewash, and he calls 1985-6 the blackwash, because they whitewashed England in England, or they blackwashed them in the West Indies. But that's Sir Viv's take. But it was sort of an epic moment as England finally managed to overcome the West Indies. And in that game, there's a nice little detail. He takes a catch down at deep third man, or deep third, I should say, but in those days we would have said deep third man, deep backward point. And it's a good catch. He runs in front of the boundary a bit. He sort of dives forward, but he takes it two-handed, and he rolls over and takes a catch. On the Analyst podcast, 2014, I should say vodcast, he was rating the 10 greatest catches that have ever been taken, which is a marvellous thing. It's a classic Simon Hughes thing to do. And I found this piece of footage, and he rates catches out of 10 for difficulty of catch, out of 6 for importance to the match, and out of 4 for seriousness of match. So 4 is a test match, 3 is an ODI, and 2 at that time appeared to be, a county game or something. I don't know. And it came in 8th in the greatest catches of all time. You will actually see, and I'm not cheerleading for the IPL here, but I have seen 10 better catches in the last 4 weeks than Darren Gough's catch. It was a very good catch. But so he was instrumental in that game, both with ball and bat and in the field. But the very last thing I will say is about Darren Gough that I have a personal connection to him, which I love him for forever, which is that I was commentating for Test Match Sofa at Perth in 2010-11, but we were doing it in England. And the Perth Test Match is, as anybody knows who commentates off Tube Ashes series, is the worst of them all because it starts at 2:30 UK time, if it's not a day-nighter. And so you can't get any proper sleep beforehand. It doesn't end. You don't get back to your house until like noon every day. It utterly messes you up. And at 4:30 in the morning, lunch happens, and literally everybody else in the Test Match Sofa team goes for a nap, leaving me to run lunch on my own with an interview with Darren Gough. And we've managed to get Darren Gough at the ground, and he was supposed to be doing some hosting for people. And he was very polite, very courteous, but he thought he was giving me 10 minutes. And when I realised that absolutely nobody in the Test Match Sofa team was left awake, I realised I had to keep him talking. And I kept him talking. He became increasingly terse for 38 minutes. But the point at which I'm most proud of both myself and he for not actually just downing tools and going, no more, was about 26 minutes in, and I could sense he desperately wanted to go. And I said, oh, one last thing, Darren. You remember that catch which you took down on the boundary where you caught it and you banged your head really hard on the ground? I was trying to think of anything. And in fairness to him, he listened to the question and he talked me through all of it. And I love him for that, because he filled a really crucial 7 minutes of Test Match Sofa when I had no one else to talk to. And I was talking to Darren Gough in a flat in Nunhead, and he was at the ground in Perth, and he was unfailingly lovely. And those are my memories of Darren Gough. I've run through a few there, but I hope that expresses our love.
Very good. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Darren Gough. Thank you, Fran. Thank you, everybody who sent in a number to the show this week. Thank you, everybody who sends in numbers in all the other weeks. And the people who are on the waiting list. We couldn't do it without you. We love you all. This is why the show exists. If you want to get involved, patreon.com/thefinalword. You can find links in the show notes if you want to donate to the Edinburgh Marathon fundraising that's going on for the Lord's Taverners. That's happening there. If you want the NordVPN offer, or if you want to find out about what's going on at Westfield with the Good Festival. That's it. That's enough from us. Daniel Norcross, Geoff Lemon. It has been a pleasure. Storytime 183 is done, and we will see you on whatever the next Final Word episode is. Whatever it is, it'll be coming up soon.
I told you that'd be an hour. It's only an hour, wasn't it?
Fuck me.
Sorry.